So getting funding from a foundation can seem really transactional. You apply, you wait around, you hear yes or no, you start over. Sometimes you get feedback, sometimes you don't. But the best funder relationships are relationships. So when we say funder relationships, we can mean anything from, the program manager that you talk to every time that you call to learn more information. It could be a foundation that's renewing your grant for, every year for 10 years, and you know everyone by name. And it could even be a rare moment when a funder reaches out to you with an opportunity. Now, Candid has a long history of tracking grant and nonprofit data, connecting fundraisers and funders. So we're pulling back the curtain a little bit to see what the data shows and what it takes to actually build a funder relationship that lasts. Before we dive in, it would be awesome if everyone could share their organization name, their cause area, and how you're feeling about funder relationships right now. If you're just starting to develop one, you've got a few good ones, you're feeling discouraged, where are you? We want to know. Now, I'm really excited to introduce our speakers. We've got Aleda Gagarin, Vice President of Influence at Candid. She defines how Candid shows up and has an impact on the nonprofit sector. Prior to this, and very valuable for this conversation, Aleda worked nearly every development job that Candid had, going from an associate to associate VP of development. So she knows a lot about building lasting funder relationships. And Kat Clerkin is our Associate Vice President of Research. She's leading the team who conducts the research using Candid's data, and she has the big picture view on who's getting funded and who is missing out. So let's start with what Candid's data tells us about the most common types of nonprofit and funder relationship. What pattern is emerging from that data?
Yeah, so thanks for that overview, Kate. This is a topic that my research team was just looking at recently. So we pulled a sample of data of a few thousand nonprofits and looked at funding patterns to them over the last decade or so. We specifically were kind of narrowing in on funding from private foundations, and we categorized grants in two ways. We looked at either continuing funders, which are funders that have given to that specific nonprofit in the past and we're giving them a grant again, and new funders, which were funders that hadn't given to that specific nonprofit before. And obviously there's a lot of differences. It depends on how big you are and how long you've been around and all of these things. But in general, on average, we saw that about 60% of funding came from continual funders who had given to those nonprofits in the past. And interestingly, when we looked at these patterns over time, this seems to be on the rise. So 2023 is our most recent comprehensive set of grants data. And for that year, on average, it was actually up to 70%, which I think really kind of highlights why we're talking about this today, right? Your best bet at getting funding is to get funding from somebody you already have a relationship with.
All right, so you need to build that relationship. I think that is really easier said than done, though, because we know that a lot of funders don't actually allow for unsolicited proposals. So you need to wait for them to invite you to apply. So how do you even build the relationship if you can't get through the door?
Yeah, I think that this is super, super, super important. And I think sometimes we get a little scared about that, right? Like you're not allowed to do a solicited proposal. The data on this is interesting. So first and foremost, if you look at IRS data, so like what foundations put on their 990 forms when they're filling out their grant making information, research shows that actually 71% of foundations say that they do not accept unsolicited proposals, which is huge. But that's actually can be a little misleading, because when you dig into the data a bit more, what we learned was a lot of those foundations who are saying that they don't accept unsolicited proposals are really small. So it's not so much that they don't want to hear from you. It's just that they don't have the staff, the capacity to just like say it's a free for all. Anybody can submit anything. And then the other thing is that the wording on the IRS form is really narrow. It's really about do you accept, or, whether or not you have pre-selected charities or, an official kind of process. And in practice, it's actually a lot fuzzier. So we did a survey last year of large foundations, and we asked them whether they accepted unsolicited proposals. And we actually found that 55% said yes. So that's a much bigger difference than what you see on the actual official tax forms.
All right. So even funders that say they don't accept unsolicited proposals actually do accept them.
Sort of. I think the answer is really that for the what's on the tax form is a really kind of narrow read of how you can reach funders. And there's actually a lot of different ways you can go about getting your ideas and your grant proposals in front of funders that aren't that very specific thing that's what's tracked by the IRS. And so on that survey that I just mentioned, another thing that was really interesting is that a lot of foundations in the kind of text write-in part of the survey shared kind of tips of different exceptions to the rules or different ways, even if they don't officially accept unsolicited proposals, the other ways you can get a hold of them. So, for example, they shared that maybe it's not a full grant proposal that they're accepting unsolicited proposals for, but they do have a form on their website where you can, put in your information and share a little bit about your nonprofit. Sometimes they accept letters of inquiry, but not full proposals. Sometimes they have unsolicited proposals, but only for 1 month out of the year. So they still technically check the box, that they don't always, right? And one of the things that I think was really interesting was that several foundations said that, the reason that they don't accept these full proposals that are unsolicited is it's a lot of work. And it's a lot of work to just put all of this together if it's not going to be a good fit. So some of these foundations really said that they would prefer to have a conversation to get to know you and then solicit this, right? So that you can put your time where it matters most. So I think at the end of the day, no matter what that checkbox says, if the foundation's a really good fit for the kind of work you do, you should just reach out to them and start making those connections.
I'm sure there are a lot of nonprofits in the audience who are very excited to hear that, of the 71%, you actually can get in touch with people. So Aleda, you have done this work. You've been the one who is building these relationships from the ground up. You've been the one who's been trying to figure out if you can submit that. And, what do you think nonprofits misunderstand about how these relationships actually work with funders?
I wouldn't say misunderstanding so much as I think nonprofits can underestimate the level of power that they have, right? And what I mean by that is, I think fairly obvious, but I'll state it anyway. Foundations have the money. We live in a society where money does equate to power. And so it creates sometimes a very uneven dynamic that I think a lot of nonprofits have internalized because that's how it works. And this plays out in a couple of ways, right? A nonprofit might feel well, they don't accept solicited proposals, so I can't bother them. Bother them. It's their job to give away money. And if you get a no to a coffee or asking for advice or to reaching out, then you're in the same place that you were when you were never going to ask, right? So go ahead and do that. Your work is valuable. You should advocate for it. I also think that if your first touch point is a proposal, because you can submit one, I've literally never had that work out for me in 13 years of fundraising for Candid, right? It's the old adage, all seasoned fundraisers know it. Ask for money, you get advice. Ask for advice, you get money, right? So just reaching out to someone to start an actual relationship is important. And then in the broader context of how we think about the work, nonprofits are just as important to foundations as foundations are to nonprofits. So yes, we do need money to meet our missions, to serve our communities, our causes, and get our work done. Foundations cannot exist as tax havened money without giving out at least 5% of what they earned that year to qualifying nonprofits, right? And so they can't function without you either. You are the on the ground, in the work expert. And so I think trying to flip that on its head internally can be really helpful. And so I would say less about not understanding and more about underestimating.
So in the role that you're currently in, you do a lot of chatting with funders and foundations across the sector. What do funders actually notice about nonprofits that nonprofits might not realize they actually know?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back. I'm a big fan of power dynamics and can be very annoying. And yes, I get paid to yap, so stop me if I'm yapping too much. But I think that back to that power dynamic, I think nonprofits sometimes can underestimate how good foundations can be when you're struggling or facing challenges with the grant, right? And so the tendency, let's say you got a grant to do some sort of a program, it is not panning out the way you thought it would, or there's certain roadblocks. I think sometimes the tendency can be to force it into working as exactly as you described in the grant proposal so that everything's kind of clearing the right way. And I would really say that in my experience, and we've had this happen at Candid and previously Foundation Center quite a few times, where it just wasn't playing out the way we thought it would. And I always lean into transparency. I'm not a CYA person, and I can't actually now say what that means on LinkedIn now that I've said it. So there's Google. But when it's not working, I bring funders in pretty early in the process to talk to them. Again, the old adage, to get their advice, to be transparent about where roadblocks might be or what's going differently than we thought it would, and get their buy-in to change the work of the grant or the timeline of the grant if we need more time. And usually, because funders know that like any organization, nonprofits are going to face those challenges, in my experience, they're very welcome to that. In the process of bringing them in early and treating them as actual thought partners, project partners, instead of the donor with all of the power, strengthens the relationship, builds trust. And in my experience, like continues to open the door to getting more grants from the funder because they're in it with you and they're watching you work to proactively problem solve. And that's going to build trust in your organization.
So you kind of sit in like a unique position now. You've had this like amazing career of working way up through development. Now you get to like hear from like the inside of foundations of what's going on. What's something that you know now that you wish you had known in that like first development associate role at Candid?
Oh man. Cold LOIs, proposals, kitchen sinking it feels really productive, and it does not work. So I got into development work entirely by accident while I was finishing a master's in urban planning with a focus on community advocacy. And as an associate, like I was new and very much had that like, please, sir, can I have some more mentality to fundraising and like putting out as many LOIs and proposals as possible. And I felt very busy. But the one big grant that I landed in my first year did not start with a proposal. It started with a conversation that I just kept like doggedly working and working and working until it became a $250,000 new grant. I met my entire personal target that year in one shot with, 99 cold LOIs just laying on the floor with zero success. So that's the part that I think is really important to think through.
So, one of the things that you have said a lot is like thinking about power. And I think that is really important also for thinking about this other layer that comes along with building funder relationships. Because a lot of, nonprofits don't have a simple or clear connection to potential funders. And some nonprofits are not able to build those relationships and have more systemic things built up against them. Kat, what have you seen from the data about what nonprofits are more likely to be able to build these relationships long term and which aren't?
Yeah, so we were just looking into this. We just launched a report called From Transaction to Transformation, along with our partners over at AbbVie. That the aim of this research project was to try to understand the circumstances of Black-led nonprofits specifically, and also what they want these relationships with funders to look like, and also what they currently look like today. And so I think when on the topic of like what what do good relationships look like? I think everything that Aleda just said, right? Like those funders who are like in the trenches with you that you can have open communication with and like figure it out as you go. And a lot of them also shared that that is hard, right? Like it is hard for them to get to that place with the funders. And in terms of numbers, when we looked at that kind of breakdown of new funders and continuing funders that I was just talking about, specifically for small, under 1 million revenue, Black-led nonprofits, only 36% of their funding comes from continual funders, compared to 60% in general. And this makes a difference because, as we just talked about, right, like getting in those relationships is so important so that you can have that support. And so there is a real inequity in being able to build those relationships, and small nonprofits and Black-led nonprofits specifically have an additional burden of having to continue to work harder to even get there.
Yeah, and next month, our LinkedIn Live will be on small nonprofits. So we're going to be diving a little bit more into what's stacked up to them. And if folks are interested in learning more about this, I'm sharing right now resources relating to this discussion, so you can go through that. And speaking of chat, we're actually going to start slowly shifting over to more Q&A portion. So if you have questions, now is the perfect time to ask them in the chat. While I ask Aleda and Kat for their more practical advice that they'd have for the nonprofits that are listening today. So what's something that a nonprofit can do today, this week, to actually help them build those better funder relationships? Aleda, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I mean, share information about yourself, your organization, and your work. Take it's brutal. I have ADHD, so doing like cold emails to people or follow-up emails is the simplest 5-minute task that I can stare at for 3 hours. But I make my little list and I send those emails and follow up to, and hey, check it off of a piece of paper. It feels great. Look through your stewardship. So one of the things that I have our team do that works really well is you shouldn't only be talking to funders when you have an ask or a problem. Like the majority of your conversation, your outreach, your stewardship with funders should just be like, hey, here's this thing. I thought you would be interested. So we look at, Kat's team puts out incredible reports every year. My development team will make sure to send like 1-to-1 emails to the funders in their portfolios that they think would be interested in that report, to be like, here's this resource, thought it, you would find it interesting. Like, let me know if you have any feedback, and finding ways to connect your work with their work that are like helpful and opening to dialogue and not connected to either an ask or an issue really strengthens the relationship. And then the one other thing that I would say that has really helped me with my career that is more of a mental model shift. So I mentioned before, I got into development by accident while I was getting a master's focused on community advocacy. And the thing when I was like new and desperate and frustrated that helped my work is that I started treating development and fundraising like advocacy work, partially because that's just what was familiar to me. But once I started treating it inside of my own head, like, no, I'm not asking for money. I am advocating for these resources so that this community and this cause are served. And when I treated it like that internally, I became a lot more fearless about like doggedly building relationships, sticking with it, and making asks. And it really catapulted my career. So I would suggest that little mental model because it's been incredibly fruitful for me.
So I'd actually love to follow up on something, because I think, one of the things that we know this from data that we're seeing right now, is that nonprofit folks are burned out, they're at capacity, they don't have time. And a lot of this like relationship building seems like it would take a lot of time. So do you have any suggestions for people who are already at capacity? What can they do to maybe make their lives a little bit easier?
I mean, I tend to focus on quality over quantity. So I'd rather a funder hear from me once in 4 months with like a really good check-in than, sending weekly updates and newsletters, right? So like focus on quality over quantity. I think when you're close enough to a funder and they're asking you for too much, you can tell them so. I have also successfully done that. Kat watched me do it in real time and can confirm. But like when funders are just really doing too much, which happens a lot of the times, if you have a longstanding deep relationship that you've done that work on, push back. Tell them as much. Like tell them why you're burnt out and why the work is strapped. And it should not be a surprise, especially now, to any funder paying attention. I think like the new CEP, Center for Effective Philanthropy report that came out recently is both fantastic and incredibly sobering. I'm just double checking my numbers, but it's like 60% of nonprofits are finding it harder to fundraise from foundations right now. 40% are getting less funds right now. And many are at capacity. And with risk to their services. So like really narrow down on where you think you have your best shot at maintaining relationships. And lastly, we are in a time where stability is incredibly important and very lacking in the nonprofit world, thanks to the current political and legislative environment. Retention is always more important. There's nothing more important than retention of current funders. So really focus there, because if you start ignoring current funders to chase new funders, like the amount of effort you have to put into getting a new funder is so much more than the amount of effort to retaining funders. So my team does focus a lot on retention, and then I'm out there focusing right now on like bigger new opportunities, but don't take your current donors for granted ever.
That's great. Kat, what is your practical advice someone can do this week?
I think just building on what Aleda was saying, like it sounds so basic, it's silly, but like treat people like humans. I think especially like in the age of AI that we are in, I think what you can do is do your best to get to a human and talk to them like a human. Which like, I mean, like the good news is we all hopefully have experience doing that, right? Like take your information from your knowledge from the rest of your life and how you build relationships and like apply that to relationships with funders, right? Which means like, you don't go into a conversation and just like say everything about yourself, right? Like you ask somebody about what they're interested in and like find common ground and talk about that. And, you don't, have a first conversation with somebody and be like, I need $1 million, right? Like you talk to them and you learn what you have in common and what you can work together and do. And you can do that, I'll put a plug for like right here on LinkedIn. That's something you can do while you're on this platform is find a funder that, that you love their work, follow them, find people that work there, follow them, put some intelligent comments in some of their posts and like start the conversation that way, right? Like don't start with the ask.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So we've got some questions from our audience. So the first one, this is kind of a quick one for Kat. What is a small nonprofit?
There are lots of definitions for sure. In the report I just mentioned, we use the cutoff as a $1 million budget as a small nonprofit. But I know our next conversation that you're hosting, Kate, is going to be about very small nonprofits. And so that conversation is even smaller, right? Like $50,000 organizations. It really, I think it depends on the context of like what subsector are you in? What kind of work do you do? I don't think that there's one definition.
Great. This might be more of an Aleda question we've got from Margie. Should communications come from the fundraising team or the executive director?
I think it really depends. And this is a part about professionalism, corporate areas, and nonprofits that are not my favorite. People do care about titles. Sometimes, a lot of them. I don't, but many do. So I think it partially depends on what the relationship and who you're reaching out to. I think generally speaking, if I'm talking to or hoping to get a meeting with a potential funder or prospect and it's their CEO, I will often ask my CEO to at least attend the meeting with me or take it on her own. Whereas when it's executive level staff, program officers, program directors, it's me and or my team or some combination thereof. Although there are foundation CEOs that can be very chill, it's usually the smaller ones because they actually have the time to meet with people. But your development team should be empowered to talk to funders, absolutely. Because if you hinge everything on one person in an organization, then it becomes about the person and not the organization. And you want sort of the ability to be about the organization and to maintain communications if you do have changes with an executive level person.
So I love this because I love, like, what are the red flags of things? What are, like, the red flags of an outreach email? What are the things that shouldn't be included?
Don't ask for money in the first email. Just don't. It's just like if they don't have the money or don't know you, they're not going to have like the impetus to get creative about where they can find the money. So don't make it about an ask. Just make it about your collective work. Make it a conversation, a quick 25-minute, not overwhelming introductory meeting is the ask, and be flexible.
Great. All right. General operating support. I think we all love conversations about this. Kat, do you want to give us a little insight into what the state of GOS is at the moment? And then maybe Aleda, you could share a little bit on how to get that GOS.
Yeah, general operating support that can just kind of like support your organization in general and not go to a specific project is so important. It lends so much, right, ability to kind of have some stability, flexibility, make sure that you can kind of meet your communities where they're at. And we know it's harder to get, right? Like a lot of funders don't want to give general operating support as their first grant to a new funder or to a new nonprofit. Like they want to focus on something more tangible and kind of like work their way up to general operating support. Statistics vary depending on what kind of sample and measures you're using, but general operating support is definitely still not the norm. I think it's, it hovers around 30% or so of overall grant making in the sector. But again, that varies a lot depending on what you're looking at.
Yeah, it happens. It's unfortunate. I wish there was infinitely more operating support and untied dollars because it does reflect trust in nonprofits. Some funders and some donors just don't do it. But I think the longer you work with a funder or donor, because I know for some folks, this is individuals instead of institutions, start kind of like slowly making the case along the way of your project grant check-ins. Instead of saying like, don't refer to operating support as keep the lights on. No one feels it's true. Like we should keep our lights, but it's so much more than that. It's about having an organization that can actually deliver on the things that they care about. So tie general operating support to the project that they're interested in and talk about how it makes the work more flexible and more sustainable so that the things they care about can actually get accomplished. And just like chip away at it, slowly keep trying. At Candid, we often, for new funders, leverage our project-based fundraising in the hopes of within 1 to 3 years converting them to operating support. But again, it's just continued relationship and conversation.
All right. Any advice on how to get board members engaging with funders? Or should you?
Yes. I mean, unless you think they're going to like be bad at it for some very specific reason related to a trustee. Yes, your trustees should absolutely be involved in fundraising. I check in with my board about how we're doing on contributed revenue regularly. Some nonprofits have official fundraising committees, and that's fantastic. Our board does not, but our trustees are incredibly helpful in terms of sourcing new prospects. I'll meet with them one-on-one to just say, who do you know that I'm not thinking of? But I also give them a very directional list. So don't give trustees an open-ended question because for nonprofits, they are in volunteer positions while they have other full-time jobs. So the way, I tend to approach it with my team is, here's a list of our top prospects as like a questionnaire. Do you know any of these people? And if yes, are you willing to vouch for us and connect us? Here are the projects that we're fundraising for. Do you think, like, is there any of your peers in the foundation world that come to mind that you think we're missing? So we have like very explicit directional asks and try to manage their time, where I'm like, all right, I'm building this survey. I promise it'll take you no more than 20 minutes to fill out. And I promise I'm going to take no more than 30 minutes to follow up with you. And then just like anyone, you know, managing up to make sure that it happens. But trustees are there to make sure your organization is financially healthy and successful. So they should ideally be open to supporting you with fundraising.
All right. So I feel like AI had to come into the conversation because AI is in every conversation. I know that we have been asking funders about their use of AI. What is the impact? What do we know? Kat, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, so we've been asking funders this for the last couple of years on our annual survey of, you know, how are you using AI? Are you using AI to review things? Do you accept proposals that have been, you know, edited with AI? Do you have policies? And I think what we've learned so far is mostly just that it's really kind of the Wild West. The most popular answer we've gotten is either we don't know yet, or we haven't decided, or not yet, but we're looking into it. So in general, I don't think that there is like a huge trend of like either funders using AI or encouraging or discouraging. But I think it is definitely on the rise. And I think, you know, just from being at conferences and talking to nonprofits, like it is definitely something that is entering the fundraising space. And I think is going to have huge ripple effects, right? Of like how many proposals get submitted and how they're assorted and all of that. So it's definitely entering the space, and I think it's going to be changing things rapidly.
Yeah, Aleda, do you have any thoughts on AI in the fundraising world that you want to share?
It can be useful. For fundraisers, check the work. AI is only as good as the data that it's leveraging and the prompts that you're giving it. So if you're using AI for fundraising, triple check the work before you submit anything. In terms of funders, I think one of the concerns that I've heard from funders is just that they're going to get too many applications because of the time reduction for nonprofits. So I'm curious to see how that will play out in terms of review capacity. And I'm hoping we don't get to a point where it's only robots talking to robots. But unless like the sector collectively sort of figures out how to leverage AI beyond just talking broadly about how AI is going to change everything and it's inevitable, I do worry about the future.
All right, we're going to do one more question, and then we're going to thank our amazing speakers. So how can we overcome the challenge of funders wanting to fund only program expenses but not staff time? So this is kind of getting back to that GOS. But I think this is a big challenge. Staff are important. They do the work. How do we get them funded?
Sore spot. If there's any funders on here right now, don't do that. That's bad behavior from funders. You have to cover staff time too. Who else do you think is delivering on the other hard costs and programmatic costs? It's literally the staff. I know that's not an answer to the question, but it is not a good funder practice, and we're all tight on time and resources. So I don't think any of us have time to pretend that that's really okay. In terms of overcoming the challenges of funders, lots of funders, you know, do programmatic support or project support instead of operating support. What makes that worth it is both the staff time, like specifically billed to that project. So for example, if I'm raising money for Candid sector defense work, in my budget, I have all of the staff time from my team and Kat's team and how much time we think they'll spend on it for the year built in. And then also an additional layer of 20% overhead, which is the best practice for foundations. I would suggest like gently calling the funder in for a conversation about it and asking them questions about why. I would not do what I just did to LinkedIn and say bad behavior practice. I don't think that'll work. But you could just talk to them and say, like, hey, I really wanted to check in with you on this. I'm curious, like, is there a reason that you don't want to fund staff time? Do you know, is there something missing from how we talk about our staff? So ask questions, because that'll help you find like whatever the weird pathway it is for that funder to make the case. And I would like, I'm a data nerd, Kat's a data nerd, we're a data nerd at Candid. Come with the data. Like, come with some research and statistics about like common best practices about funding staff time and overhead, and why it's important, because they just might not know any better, to be honest. They really might not. So always start from a place of curiosity, but I would find a way to address it head on.
Thank you so much, Aleda and Kat, for this incredible conversation. I hope everyone who attended, you have something useful that you can walk away with. I shared a lot of resources in the comments, so you can go and check out a lot of the interesting reports that we were talking about. And we will see you next month for our conversation on very small nonprofits. It will be on June 17th, which is also a Wednesday at 12 p.m. And that Aleda will be back for that conversation, but she'll also be joined by Grace Sato from the research team and Yvonne Sims, who is one of our amazing trainers, who's going to give a lot of practical advice. So we hope to see you then. Thank you all so much for coming today.